Hopefully everyone's good. Steelers. I mean that.
Everybody in the league.
Sure.
Is all pro.
Steelers win again. Russ throws 2 touchdowns, split the season series with the Browns. Russ this season is 6-1, bro. You've always believed in him. So 250 yards passing. His yards per pass are pretty good. 12 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Passer rating is over 104 now. Should he be in the MVP conversation?
I'm allergic to dumb questions.
It's just, just because he's only going to play about half the season. Like, how many games
in the
will he end up playing?
conversation?
10?
No, he doesn't need to.
9 or 10. He'll play. He's played 7, so they got 4
He could
more.
play
Okay,
11.
so he can play 11 games. But look, if he played the whole season, absolutely. Now, I wouldn't say he'd be at the top of the conversation, but he'd be a top 5 candidate right now if he were playing the entire season and they were winning at this pace. Like, you saw his numbers. He's playing really good football.
So who's he knocking out at these numbers? I mean, like, so you have Josh, you have Goff, you have Lamar.
TJ Watt 5.
No, but hold on. But Darnold, you can't make the argument for him that's not for Darnold.
Darnold's trying to get in there.
In the conversation.
But he doesn't have the offensive supporting cast that Darnold has.
I think he's not even in the conversation for MVP of the Steelers. The Steelers.
He'd be in the conversation.
TJ Watt's the MVP of the Steelers.
6-1.
Justin Fields was 4-2. If we're going to do the record thing.
Justin Fields had 10 touchdowns.
Yeah, like what do we? I mean, I think Russ
their offense is
6-1.
taking off.
I think Russ is having an awesome year, and good for him. The Steelers having an awesome year. MVP conversation is insane talk. Even if he had played the whole year, but given the fact that he hasn't, it's insane. Categorically.
Can I please tell you where he's the MVP? He's absolutely the MVP. So right now he makes $1.2 million on the salary cap. Do you know where that ranks him in quarterbacks?
87th.
Close, 58.
50. Oh, sorry.
He
I
is
overshot it.
Think about that.
Yeah.
No,
he
the
has
value he's getting, you're
$1.2
right.
million in salary cap for the Steelers. So there he's the MVP.
If they keep winning, he's in the conversation. He's not top
I don't
5.
think you'll get-
He's
yeah.
in
But
the
how
conversation.
many people are in the
Conversation.
conversation?
Oh, if you talk about it.
50?
7?
If there's, the conversation would have to get to 25 people.
No, he's in the
He's not-
conversation.
If he had played the
He's
whole
not
year
in
like
the
this,
No.
conversation.
Why are we talking about right now? There's not this
Stafford's
big
not in
deal.
the conversation.
What?
Stafford is not in the conversation.
For the record, he has the exact same odds as Matt Stafford right now.
He shouldn't be in the
exact same odds.
conversation.
But that's only
Is
because
Mahomes
he
in the
hasn't played
conversation?
enough.
Of course Mahomes is
Is
in the
Penei
conversation.
Sewell in the conversation?
Yeah, he's in the conversation.
All right, so is T.J. Watt in the conversation?
Of course.
Is Bo Nix in the conversation?
No.
Is Jaden Daniels in the conversation?
No.
Okay,
He
just so you know, he has
Wait,
the same
Wayne
odds as
Daniels
Bo
in
Nix.
the
He
conversation?
was.
10-3.
If
He was
Russell
in the
Wilson's
conversation.
in the
He
conversation,
was in the
James
conversation.
Daniels-
Lamar
He left the
Jackson in the
conversation. Of
conversation.
course Lamar
Is
is in the
Derrick Henry in the conversation?
Derrick Henry's in the conversation.
Okay,
It's a big conversation.
It's a long conversation.
It's when if you do a podcast
It's an
called
audio book,
NFL
not a
MVPs,
conversation.
it's like, now let's talk about Russ.
No,
How long is that podcast? 3 hours?
Is Joe Burrow in the conversation?
Yes,
No.
100% Joe Burrow's in the conversation.
Right
You see his
now,
numbers?
He
if
should
league
be.
MVP was, if it said a sub rule was has to come from the AFC North, would he finish in the top 5? The answer is no.
Russell Wilson?
No. The answer is no.
Oh, no,
If
he
it was
would.
just an AFC North award, you would have Lamar.
Yeah, Derrick.
You would have Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
You would have Joe Burrow. You would have T.J. Watt.
I wouldn't have Burrow.
But he's in the conversation.
They got how many wins they got?
Then
4.
you-
Yeah,
Burrow
dominate
is
the
almost as many
conversation.
wins as Russell Wilson for you win zealots.
Yeah,
How
but
many
he's
losses
got
he
way
have?
more
That-
losses.
Zach,
right. He got more losses.
Let's look at the
than-
quarterbacks with 1 loss.
Okay, so it's just Mahomes, Goff, and Russ.
Hello, great conversation. Guy doesn't lose games,
Russ
you're
is
going to penalize
balling.
him?
Russ
Because
is
he was hurt?
cooking.
Can I just tell you something?
Russ is cooking.
In the conversation.
This is my fault because I wasn't on the morning meeting. I cannot believe we just spent 5 minutes on Russell Wilson league MVP.
No, the issue is we shouldn't have done it whether he should be in the conversation, because if you have a conversation about it, it means he's in the conversation. You can't.
Okay. They didn't actually have a conversation about it. I kept waiting to see, hey, maybe they'll talk about something, and they never did. And this is the problem, because this is the type of content that the Steelers get, okay? Should Russ be in the MVP conversation? And then it turned into that whole let's just go off the rails. Not an actual real conversation about how great Russ has been, how great the Steelers have been. The whole saving Russ's career at this point. I mean, it's not hard to imagine that if Russ, struggled or fizzled out with the Steelers, I mean, like, who's running to get him necessarily? I mean, maybe a random team like the Raiders or the Giants. I mean, maybe it depends on where they're drafting, I suppose. But I mean, what Russ has been doing has been unbelievable. Has been awesome. Let me see if I can get where they brought the stats up real fast. Because I mean, I think everything he's done has been really, really impressive, honestly. And I think the fact that they can't even construct this conversation in a way where it's like, hey, let's talk about Russ and the Steelers. It's just, should Russ be in the MVP conversation? And it's like, let's just freak out now and say, this is ridiculous, blah, 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 blah. These are all the reasons why Russ is not something, rather than these are all the reasons why Russ is something. I mean, the Steelers are a top seed in the NFL. I mean, that's not even up for debate, right? That's not, we can't even debate that. It's just a straight numbers game at this point. They're legitimately competing for the 2 seed. And honestly, if it wasn't for Justin Fields, they would be competing for the 1 seed. Okay? So, yeah. I mean, heck, even them putting Justin Fields in against the Browns is part of the reason why they lost and have dropped another game. So, what Russ has been doing, again, as you can see the numbers, and you guys know I don't live and die by the numbers, but this is awesome. Again, should he be in the MVP conversation? The one thing that this little take did bring up was good is like, define conversation, right? Like, define conversation. Can it only be 5 players in the conversation? Or when we say MVP conversation, are we saying that it's only the top 5, right? The ballot or whatever it is. Because then it's like, well, I don't know. It gets a little bit harder. But if we want to discuss what Russ has brought for this team, we know huge. How do we know? Maybe because this team looks light years different than it has over the last couple of years when they had other quarterbacks. Has this offense not immediately looked better? How about comparing the offense from Justin Fields to Russ? Has things not got immediately better? Yeah, I'd say so. So we know Russ has had a huge impact on this team. So to kind of downplay it, what Nick is doing there is pretty much like what he does to Brock Purdy and stuff, saying that it's everyone gets credit but him. Essentially, that Russ or Purdy are like the last people to get credit. And that's just not fair. I mean, it's just not. Again, we can make the argument that he should not be in the MVP conversation. And I think Brew brings up the good, an interesting point of like how many games are you playing and all of that. But he's been playing great. And he's been playing like a Pro Bowler. I mean, right now it should be Burrow. I mean, it's kind of crazy. You got Burrow, Allen, Lamar, Russ, and then Mahomes. Again, if we're looking at the AFC Pro Bowlers, I mean, it's got to be Allen. He's in the MVP conversation. Joe Burrow is playing out of his mind. I know they're losing, but he's obviously playing out of his mind. That's Pro Bowler. Lamar Jackson was also on like kind of historic numbers. That's a Pro Bowler. So then the 2 odd people out are Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes. And right now, technically, Russell Wilson's playing better than Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying I'm picking Russ over Mahomes. Okay? Let me say that one more time. I am not picking Russ over Mahomes. But we're talking about this season. This season. So you got to forget everything in the past. We're talking about this season. And I think what Russ has done, I mean, again, if people are going to criticize a player so intensely, saying this quarterback will never play again, we've seen his last snap last year, right, being so intense, especially when Russ was sidelined because of his calf. Nick was like, who will never play ever again? Like, just very intense. This is the last we've ever seen of Russ and all of that. I think it's just not right to not balance that take out when someone is now playing great and is literally playing like a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. I mean, I don't understand why that segment had to have been constructed in a way where it was pretty much setting up to just like kind of downplay and marginalize what Russ has been doing. And it should be praise. Honestly, it should be praise. Because what he's been doing has not been easy. And the dude has gotten so much hate and so much and criticism that when he's exceeding expectations and playing great and doing things that majority of people were not expecting, I mean, you got to give credit where credit is deserved. And it's kind of frustrating at this point. No one's really taking the Steelers seriously at all. At all. And I find it pretty absurd, honestly. I don't know what it will take for the Steelers to start to get kind of the real credit, and it's because we really do become obsessed with like 3 or 4 teams and their quarterbacks. When you really think about it, so much is just Mahomes Chiefs, Allen Bills, Lamar Jackson Ravens, and then you got the Eagles and the Lions. And then it's kind of just like everything else is kind of scattered. You definitely have the consistent of the Cowboys because they are the Cowboys and have the largest fan base. But outside of that, it's just like all the other teams are just kind of like, let's see. The 49ers, we were talking about the 49ers. When the 49ers were doing poorly and they were losing, they were ripping Brock Purdy. Ripping him. He plays an unbelievable game, absolutely rolls and dominates the Bears. Right? The segment was literally leading into that game was, does Brock Purdy need a big game? Does he have anything to prove, make his, to get paid, all of this, right? It was all like Purdy, pressure on Purdy. He plays great. They win. And I don't hear or see a single 49er segment. And now the Steelers playing great, Russ playing great, and it's crickets. This is not a real take. I mean, they didn't even say anything. They were just like, he's the 25th MVP. He's 25th down on the line. Like, that wasn't like a real, hey, let's discuss and talk about how has Russ been successful? How has this been going? It's unfortunate, honestly. There's just so many juicy head-to-head matchups in the playoffs that are like, oh, man. This is like a bummer that it is just one and, you win or you go home type setup for the playoffs, because it's like, I want to see the Steelers versus the Chiefs, the Steelers versus the Ravens, the Steelers versus the Bills, the Steelers versus the Lions, the Steelers versus the Eagles. I know they're playing regular season, but I mean, like, when it really, really matters. Like, these are so many different matchups that I want to see. The Chiefs versus the Broncos, the Chiefs versus the Bills, the Ravens versus the Bills. Like, it's just like, there's just too many awesome matchups. I mean, box office, Steelers versus Chiefs, AFC Championship game, let's go. I'm all for that. Steelers, Eagles, Super Bowl, Battle of Pennsylvania. I mean, like, that would be wild. I was actually in Pittsburgh when the Eagles played the Steelers. And it was very contentious because there's definitely a lot of Philadelphia, a lot of Philadelphia fans in Pittsburgh, especially because of some of the colleges in that area. So you're going to get people from kind of like all over the state. So I'm sure that would be a really fun Super Bowl. It is actually kind of wild when you think about how iconic and how successful the Steelers have been. And this is why a lot of times when people say like, oh, your franchise means nothing, and anytime you're ever getting in a fight with someone on in the comment section or whatever, or the Cowboys fans will be like, oh, how many rings does so-and-so have, right? And it's like, that never really means anything to me in a comeback, because here's the Steelers who have rings on rings on rings, and yet they're not treated like that franchise of like, hey, they got all these rings, like they deserve all of our respect. Like, we see the Cowboys, the 49ers, and now most recently the Chiefs, of course, and the Patriots. The Patriots are kind of a similar franchise as well, mainly because they just kind of really collapsed as soon as Brady left, so that kind of makes sense. It's kind of hard to really talk about a franchise when you're not even remotely competitive. I assume if the Patriots become competitive again, they'll get some more momentum behind them. But it is actually kind of fascinating. Like, you would think the Steelers are essentially like the Cleveland Browns the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trying to think of any other random teams where it's just kind of like, yeah, pretty good. And there's no other extra respect on their name. Now, to be fair, I'm not a huge fan of having the weight of what you've done in the past, because like I always say, I don't care what you did in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Like that really means nothing to me. At this point, when having these conversations, like what you did before iPhones were invented, like it means nothing. I mean, seriously, like it's like we won 4 Super Bowls in a row in 88, 89, 90, 91, and it's like, cool. What does that have to do with 2025? Like it means nothing. Like, it's cool if that's your fan base and that's your team and you could be proud of that, but, like, also, like, what have you done in the last 30 years then? And that's what I always kind of say to Cowboys fans. It's like, okay, that's great. You had a great run in the 90s. What have you done for the last 30 years? Like, it just doesn't mean anything to me. But at the same time, I know it means a lot to the media because they're constantly bringing that stuff up, constantly talking about the history of the 49ers, the history of the Cowboys. And yet, with the Steelers, all the rings that they have holds no weight. And I don't know, I honestly don't know why. It's always so fascinating to me when I look at how certain teams get certain levels of attention and when history matters, when it doesn't. Because it could swing both ways in terms of positive and negative. And that is something, when I first started this channel, I didn't try to seek which teams are going to be popular or anything like that. I really just try to make the content that I think people are going to like. But of course, you know, I make the videos, I see the views and all of that. And I want to make content that people want to watch. That goes without saying. And it's obvious that, you know, certain teams, like, not a lot of people engage with. The New York Jets, the Jaguars, you know, the Panthers. Like, I made videos earlier on in the season of those teams, and like it ended up kind of feeling like a waste, which is frustrating because I still want to touch all the teams, but I can only make so many videos, so sometimes I gotta pick and choose. And that's what's so interesting to me, because I was like, oh, the Steelers, like they're a wildly successful team in a major city, not in the middle of nowhere, East Coast, you know, iconic division, iconic matchups, right? They're on Hard Knocks now, and I'm like, let's go. And it's so fascinating to see the lack of attention. It's both the lack of attention, but also attention. Like, what I'm trying to say is, when they do have content around the Steelers, it's the wrong conversation. This was actually the perfect example of the wrong conversation that's constantly had about the Steelers. And that's what I'm really learning more and more as the weeks go on this season. Right? The whole conversation was pretty much why Russ should not be MVP. Conversations before, I made videos before, the conversation was, why are the Steelers not actual Super Bowl contenders? I mean, multiple videos where that was like the main jumping off point, where it was like, are the Steelers for real? And it was like, it was pretty much used as a jumping off point to be like, no, they're not. It didn't feel like an actual honest conversation. And again, you can reach the conclusion that you think the Steelers are not a legitimate Super Bowl contender, or that Russ is not the MVP. But again, it just seems like when every video is when every segment, you know, again, on YouTube, on TV, whatever, is always constructed in a way that's like, hey, you're giving me layups to pretty much say why this team is not that good. It's like, it's kind of bizarre. The Steelers win a big game, no one talks about it. The Steelers lose a game, and it's like, let's talk about it. It's like, well, what? Like, what? What is it? Wait, what? And Justin Fields moved the needle a little bit, because it was kind of this, like, young quarterback. People kind of were, like, on the fence. Did he fail the Bears? Did the Bears fail him? Kind of had some energy, and because he's so hypermobile and young, like, it can kind of bring eyeballs to the screen, because you can maybe see him kind of do some like cool, fancy video game type stuff. Obviously, that did not pan out. Russ is no longer jumps off the screen like he maybe did. I mean, I listen, I love to watch him, but it's just different, right? He's not playing like he's Josh Allen necessarily. And so I think like the conversation of Russ doesn't move the needle as much, because we love new fancy things. We rather talk about Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, rather than talk about Russ. it's just kind of different, and I think that's probably also part of it as well to a degree. But yeah, I think it's a missed opportunity to kind of appreciate what the Steelers have been able to do, what Mike Tomlin has done with this team, the choices that they've made, the hires that they've made. A lot of people have been praising the Eagles for going out and getting Kellen Moore, the Commanders for going out and getting Cliff Kingsbury. And it's like, little old Arthur's not getting no love in terms of talking about what he's done with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Russ. And yeah, I don't think it's a bias against the Steelers. Honestly, I really don't think that. But it is for some weird reason like a lack of respect, and that's what I'm trying to like grasp. Like, is it just because like the fan base isn't strong enough, which doesn't make sense because they have a huge fan? Like, I can't grasp it. And if Steelers fans know, please let me know. Like, the Commanders fans are the ones that told me before, hey, we didn't get a lot of attention because like our owner was crazy and it was all bad stuff and no one wants to talk about this and elevate this team. And that made sense. I was like, okay, I understand that now, and it makes total sense. And now you're starting to slowly see that turn. You can see why New York teams get so much extra energy because so much of the media is centered on the East Coast. A lot of it is actually taking place in New York and Connecticut. And it's like, okay, that makes sense. I understand that. And by nature, then there's going to be extra bias around the other, the other teams like the Cowboys and the Eagles. And you're like, okay, I understand that. I get that. But I'm not seeing where it lands for the Steelers. Why is there, you see teams being cheered on by the media. People want to see Brock Purdy and the 49ers do good. You could see the media wants to see the Detroit Lions get there and be good. You can see that collective, like, kind of like, yeah, I don't know if this is the way it's going to be, but I hope it does. And I don't feel that energy, from the Steelers, from the media, just being like, come on, this is a great story. This is a great team. They can make some moves. They can make some noise. I don't see it, and I don't know why. It's not like Pittsburgh's like this bad, grimy, awful city that no one wants to see people succeed in. So please, Steelers fans, help me understand, because I honestly do not get it. And this just seems to be like I said, every clip I watch, this seems to be the common theme, the common denominator, and I can't make sense of it. So please help me. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Pittsburgh Steelers and Russell Wilson? Do you think he's an MVP candidate? And how do you feel about the content that's been created around the Pittsburgh Steelers over this season? Do you think it's been supportive? Do you think it's not? If it hasn't been supportive, and the lack of any of the type of stuff that I was talking about, definitely let me know in the comments below. I really am interested in learning. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions. Let's get in some fights. But ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and I absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to, something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're well on our way to doing it. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much, and see you next time.